So we've got the job description really well written. We've got the hiring manager on the hook now, so they know who they're hiring, and they have allocated parts of it out to a number of people. Let's call it 6. It's not uncommon these days. So 6 people, and now you've got 6 stages. Each person's going to deep dive on one particular thing. And now you've got some CVs that have started to come through. And I think we've already covered you owe it to the candidate to look through the CV, do a bit of background research, and be prepared. And I'd love to explore that concept of being prepared, because it's a really bad candidate experience when the hiring manager or the person doing the interview rocks up late, or is clearly unprepared, or it just knows nothing about what they're about to do. How does a hire or an interviewer, how do they prepare properly for that 9:30 in the morning meeting with a candidate?
So everyone's got their own technique, but you must take notes. Notes are really, really valuable because you want a good conversation with the candidate, but you also want good recall later. And I think one other element for both the interviewers and the hiring manager is good candidates are in high demand, and do not be slow and delayed on scheduling and having these interviews. You really need to be on the ball, because think of it like a sales lead. If your company was pitching a sales contract with a client, and you're like, yeah, the client's interested in signing, but they need to talk to us. Yeah, can I get to them in 3 weeks?
Yeah.
Sends a terrible message. And by the way, people post online, like Glassdoor and others. I interviewed for this job. The interviewer showed up 15 minutes late. No apologies. This is the rudest company on the planet. That's the brand you're shaping. So it matters to actually show some respect for the candidate, but also go fast. Like, you need to schedule. All these interviews should be scheduled same day, within days, and the debrief should take place 24 hours after the last interview.
Yeah, I agree. I always used to try and get from hello to offer in 2 weeks, and it's totally doable, even if you've got a number of steps. If you're properly organized, if you give it the right set of value, you can get from hello, Sean, to Sean, we'd like to offer you a job within 2 weeks.
But I say this is also whoever your leader of your organization is. They set the tone for how people should manage their time. And if the leader of the whole organization doesn't care about recruiting, you're going to see it trickle down to, well, I just don't have time to do these interviews. If the leader of the organization knows getting the right talent into these roles is the difference between first and last, and they tell people this is a priority, you should be spending this much of your time every week on interviews, that sets the tone. In fact, as a leader, I often would say, well, let's see what our pipeline of interviews looks like. Why is it going so slow? So that really helps set a tone from a leader of a whole organization.
Yeah. And I would also add, we're all busy, and I've been in plenty of roles where my diary is just jam-packed from morning till evening. But if I know I have an interview, I'll make sure that I have 15 minutes free before that, because I need to get out of the meeting I'm in. Maybe I need to walk to a booth or an office or something. I need to sit down. I need to make sure my stuff is ready, and I need to have 5 minutes before the candidate joins, so I'm ready. And I think it shows up. And you can tell when a hiring manager just literally rushed in and they go, well, let me just get myself sorted out. It just starts off so badly.
Yeah. So this is where the prep also on LinkedIn can help, because with LinkedIn, you can look over what is the candidate claiming they've done. And I've seen examples of candidates that were at companies, they were in my organization, and I know they were an individual contributor, but they claimed they were a vice president. So there's all sorts of fabrication that can happen out there, title inflation, titles. But you also want to see, what are people claiming? And so when I'm scanning through, I look for, do we have any direct connections that I happen to know? Because that also could be interesting during the interview of like, oh, well, I happen to know Sally really well. What would she tell me about how you did in this job? And
oh, crikey, I actually don't know Sally at all. I bluffed.
That sort of thing comes out. But, not always to the negative. Sometimes it's to the positive as well. But you're also trying to say, what are their biggest accomplishments as you scan through, especially from your criteria? Because I'm trying to take notes. I use a Word doc. And over the years, I've become very good at typing. So I actually am pretty fast at typing. I could be a court stenographer, perhaps.
Yep. Yeah.
if I chose to, but it allows me to capture a lot of details. So I will capture ahead of time any particular questions I think I may want to ask. And frankly, as an interviewer, and I've done over 1,000, I always also look for the personality. I love to see on a
Yeah.
candidate's resume other interests.
Yeah.
If and you'd be surprised at the kind of connection you can create with an interviewer because the candidate talks about, I love traveling the world to historical places. Well, I love traveling the world to historical places. Suddenly we have an open that actually can create a connection between people. So
Yeah.
never shy away from doing that.
And on the notes issue, I also take a lot of notes. I'm not as good as typist as you, but I'm pretty fast. But I don't care about spelling and punctuation and grammar. I literally just drop my thoughts down. I can come back in later on. And there's sometimes just a thing that you type and you go, oh, I forgot about that. But yes, look at that thing. And it changes your impression completely.
Yes. Yes.
Let's talk about the kind of questions that you ask. So again, I want to set it up. We've got the job description. We've got interviewers lined up to talk about a particular topic. Should each interviewer have their own set of questions lined up in advance? I mean, I use a Notion doc, and I'll just duplicate that page for this candidate based on this interview loop that I'm in. And now I know I've got my standard set of questions and I can go through it in there. So how should an interviewing manager formulate what those questions are for this part of the interview loop?
So different managers or interviewers can do it in different ways. I too like a Word doc, and I have a template, and I just make a copy for every single candidate.
Yep.
And I've got a question bank in there of questions that I've come to like over time, but I've got a lot of them that I built up. And I've been doing this for 25 years, so I've got quite a long list of interesting questions. Some in heavy rotation, some depending on the topic, I may go pull out. If I'm interviewing a data analyst, I will go pull out one of my old SQL questions and just to test to make sure. Tell me the difference between an inner join and an outer join, just to make sure that I'm testing for comprehension. But so you want a list of questions, and then before my interview, I'll tend to pull some of them up that I think I'm going to be asking that are relevant to my topics, to my criteria, whatever I'm assigned.
Yeah. And I find that, again, if you've got, I don't know how many you have, but let's just say it's 200 questions you could pull from. You clearly don't want to ask 200 questions. You might want to ask, it could even be just 5 or 6 really good quality questions.
That's right.
But I pull them together and go, right, for this particular interview loop in my engagement on this, I'm going to interview 10 candidates. I have the same starting deck of 6 questions and I can start from there, and it produces some consistency, but also I can freeform a bit. I can navigate and, go with the candidate.
And you bring up an excellent point here. If you're interviewing multiple candidates in a loop, comparison is really valuable and really useful. So I do ask the same questions of all these candidates for the same interview loop on a job, because then that gives me some sort of baseline against each of them. And the one other point I wanted to call out also is the time management here. It depends how long your interview is. I will say I severely dislike 30-minute interview slots. I find them way too insufficient to really evaluate and make a good hiring decision for a candidate in the moment. I prefer an hour. I could do 45 minutes if that's all that really will fit. But I think a 30-minute question has problems because
I agree.
Generally in the format, there's 3 sections to any interview. There's an introduction. Hi, how you doing? Great, good to chat with you today. Then there's the core interviewer questions you got to get through. And in an hour interview, I tend to do 5 minutes intro, 40 minutes to 45 minutes of interviewer question, and then 10 to 15 minutes at the end for the candidate to ask questions back for me. And it's very important for both the interviewer and the candidate to watch the clock and manage the time. So in my 40 to 45 minutes of questions, I probably only ask 4 big questions with lots of follow-ons, and we'll get into some of that, but I'm not asking 20 rapid fire questions. I'm probably asking, 4 to 6 relatively meaty questions and getting into 5 minutes to 8 minutes each. But if you as an interviewer are letting someone drone on for 20 minutes on an answer, you are responsible for burning the clock. And you may
Yes.
not even get, if let's say you have two criteria you have to get to, or maybe even three, you may fail to come up with a good answer of what's your view on this candidate on these criteria. And that's your primary responsibility to bring into the debrief.
I've been there. I've been there. I've failed in an interview as an interviewer because the candidate spoke too much and I didn't control it enough. And your overwhelming feeling is, I had two things to find out. I've got a good view on this. I didn't get time for number two. And it's like, what's the point? You've failed as an interviewer.
Yeah. Well, and this is why repeated cycles help you get better.
Yeah.
These are just good techniques consistently applied. So I
Yeah.
find a couple tools that I use when I'm in an interview with somebody. I will ask a question like, give me an example of when you had a stalled project that you needed to get on track, and what did you do? And sometimes, often, people will say, well, I've got two examples, and let me give them to you, and I'll pause them. I'll,
Hmm.
interest of time, pick the best one. Pick the
Yep.
best one for impact to the business. So I'm helping them. I'm steering and filtering, saying, don't pick an inconsequential example. Pick the most important one. And frankly, I'll see from their judgment what they think important counts as. But then it allows them to save time. Now, the other bit is I'm watching the clock as they're going through an answer. And as an interviewer, you have to decide, like, let's say you really care about think big and strategy. And as they're going through, you might say, I really want to understand how you thought about this from a strategic perspective. Um, Sometimes people will really get into the details of a story. And you can see, wow, they spent 3 or 4 minutes already talking about the pre-setup for this project. Why don't we pull it up a level? Do not feel it's rude to intervene. You're doing them a favor to say, hey, in the interest of time, let's pull it up a level and let's talk more about how the priorities were set and your role involved in that. And that
Yeah.
helps manage for time. And then, there's times where I'm interviewing candidates where I may give them a nudge to help steer them back. And then sometimes I might give them a second nudge of like, no, you're still in the weeds. Let's see if we can get here. And then after a period of time, I've drawn a conclusion. They just don't know the skill. They don't have, say, the strategy or whatever it is. I've got to cut the cord on that. So I'll say, that's fantastic. I think that's sufficient. Why don't we move on?
Yeah.
But this is also very important for the interviewer. You are selling as well as buying here. So even if a candidate is not giving you an answer that you feel is a good answer, do your best to not let it show, because it's a problem if you make the interviewer anxious and you put them off their best game. You don't want to give them this facial reaction of like, oh my God, that is the worst answer ever. You don't want them to read your body language like they're doing terrible, because it's a self-fulfilling prophecy for them and you're
Yeah.
not getting the best responses for your next question. So
Yeah.
you really, as an interviewer, need to put the candidate at ease and help guide them through it. And it's okay to say, hey, that's great. In the interest of time, why don't we wrap it there? I've got what I needed on that. There's some other important questions I want to ask.
Yeah.
Always in a positive manner.
Talking of time, my little top tip here is a lot of interviews now are online. You're looking at the camera, and it's really hard to look at a clock, and take your eyes off it, just looks poor. I downloaded a simple, it's like a £5 or something, a little digital clock that just floats on the screen. I put it on my screen just under the lens, and I can constantly keep an eye, and then I'm constantly in tune with where we're going, and I don't have to feel like I'm rushing the candidate on.